Hello, and welcome back to the Murakami Companion podcast, a show inspired by the works of Haruki Murakami, where we analyze his body of work in its entirety. Today we will be talking about the first Murakami novel ever, one of the two he wrote in his kitchen table, and one of two he refused to reprint for many years because he saw it as an immature period of his life as a writer. We're talking about Hear the Wind Sing, part of the trilogy of the Rat. Is it really a trilogy? Well, we'll talk about that when we get to the fourth book in the series. But this one is the one that starts not only Murakami's journey as a writer, but our journey as readers as well. And also this is the first part of something that will continue in Pinball 1973, a wild sheep chase and dance, dance, dance. Hear the Wind Sing, as well as the whole trilogy of the Rat, is the story of two friends, a nameless narrator and a young man only known as the Rat. The narrator, who is studying at the university, is back in his hometown during the summer and spends his days with a girl who misses a finger and his nights at Jay's bar with his friend, the Rat. Other than that, there's a few B-plots involving past relationships of the narrator, something about a radio host and a fictional writer from the early 20th century, but that's it. There is no much plot, and the ending is just what the book promises. The narrator goes back to the university and moves on with his life. I, for one, absolutely adore this book. But it must be said that it's because I read it alongside the other three. When you do that, there's a sense of an overarching plot, with Hear the Wind Sing as a magnificent introduction to the series. By itself, it feels like an incomplete book. It all depends on how you decide to read it, as part of a 4-book journey or as a standalone. But I think it stands out because of that flaw. I think there is a recurring element in Murakami's books of not always having a perfect 3-arc structure to tell a story, of not having an artificially created tension to keep the reader interested. I once heard someone call some of his books mood pieces, like looking at abstract art that doesn't quite tell a story but really fits when placed correctly in a room, and you want to look at every detail, at every stroke of paint. If I had to analyze what is the main theme of the book, I'll say it's nostalgia. But it's not that the characters feel nostalgic. That will happen in the sequel. But it's more like Murakami is around 30 years old when he writes this book. He is married, he has a business, he's writing in the little free time he has. He has pretty much an adult life. The narrator, on the other hand, is 20 years old. And the narrator is free to do whatever he wants and decides what he wants to do on the spot, with no major consequences. In a point of the story, there's a car crash, and it's mentioned that the characters involved in it spend a long time paying the city for damages, but that's just a minor detail in this story. In any other Murakami novel, this will be a central plot point, but not here. The two friends just keep drinking beer, and it's not until the next book that the Rat is described as puking in the bathroom of Jay's bar, but in this book they are indestructible. That's not quite the case for women in this book. There are women who die in this book. There's one, as we have already said, that misses a finger, but women seem to represent the other. men, I mean the rat, the narrator, and the bar owner, they seem to represent the we, the us, the first person plural. The narrator almost seems to know what is happening in the rat's head as if it were his own. But the other characters, like the female characters, seems to be a mystery for them. Also, on this topic, the book is different from later Murakami books, where there's a lot of emphasis on the relationships between men and women. But here the main relationship seems to be between friends. It seems that the only two characters that really understand each other are the narrator and the rat. While the characters are 20 years old, there's a little bit of childhood friendship there. And the relationships with women are pretty sexless. There's a certain innocence to both of these friends, like they're little kids in the bodies of 20-year-old men. And I think that adds to the nostalgia factor. The hometown, the innocence, the little adventures, the music in the radio that is already a decade old. The B-plot about the forgotten 20th century writer. This book feels like it's about a time of their lives and our lives that is gone. And I think this is accentuated by the ending. They know the narrator is just there for the summer and that he has to leave. They know that he has to go back to the real world, that he has to grow up. The rat, on the other hand, belongs to a rich family and he has dropped university. He doesn't have a job, he isn't crazy about women or the idea of getting married. He has his own philosophical ideas and finds difficulty in reading books that challenge his own notion of reality. He just wants to go to Jay's bar and have some beer. And this is where the two friends start to drift apart. The narrator has a future. He's willing to move on. The narrator knows that this sort of nostalgia life, of remembering past girlfriends, of hanging out with old friends, of waking up in houses of people you don't know, this whole life of irresponsibility, he knows is temporary. He knows that he has to move on eventually. As a whole, this is what this series of books is about. Two friends that drift apart more and more. But here in Hear the Wind Sing is where we experience firsthand why that friendship is so important in the first place. This is the more pure book in the series, but maybe of all Murakami's books. It's like he wants to put you in a car where the narrator is on the driving seat and the other characters are there too, and you're just along for the ride to have an interesting summer with no need of tension, of a story climax, of antagonist, none of that. And if that's not enough for you, you still have 3 books left in the series that will go into that direction. In fact, I think that's why it's brilliant that they pack this book with Pinball 93, the sequel, together as if they were one book. Hear the Wind Sing. The title can have many interpretations. In the book, when they talk about hearing the wind, in a strange metaphorical sense, they're talking about the passing of time and how life moves on. Maybe it's the 30-year-old Murakami talking to the 20-year-old characters in the book, telling them that their time is gonna be up soon. But it's really up to you, the reader, to analyze who is right. The narrator or the rat? Should we move on? Or should we try to stay in the happy old days as long as we can? We don't get a straight answer. In the other book, the sequel, Murakami clearly tells us that one of them is doing better than the other, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. If we want to analyze this book as a standalone, we're really left to decide that for ourselves. You can get Hear the Wind Sing pretty much anywhere where good books are sold. Nowadays, it's really easy to find editions that include both Pinball 1973 and this one together. If you want to support this podcast, or you just like cool t-shirts like Murakami does, or maybe some coffee mugs or art prints, we got a few digital stores where you can find that and much more, featuring the cover artwork for this episode, inspired, of course, by Hear the Wind Sing. There will be one for each episode released of this podcast.